The summer of 1933 was anything but typical. The United States was in the midst of the Great Depression, and it wasn't a good time to launch a new business, let alone a national sports organization. The collective heartbeat of America's people wasn't a strong one. The land of opportunity was now the land of desperation. But as Frederick Wilcox once said, progress always involves risk. You can't steal second base and keep your foot on first base. Remarkably, despite the long odds of success, Leo Fisher, assistant sports editor for the Chicago American, and Maurice Mike J. Pauley, a sports entrepreneur, found the energy to pioneer and promote a sports organization. That leap of faith, which ultimately became the Amateur Softball Association, will celebrate its 75th anniversary in 2008. Although Fisher and Pauley are credited with founding the ASA, it was George Hancock, a reporter for the Chicago Board of Trade, who invented the game of softball from inside the Farragut Boathouse in Chicago in 1887. During the 20s and 30s, the sport had as many as 22 different names, such as kitten ball, playground ball, night ball, army ball, mush ball, and diamond ball. Walter Hackinson, one of the ASA's pioneers, achieved national recognition when giving the sport its name. He saw that each state throughout the country used a different name for the sport and played by slightly different rules. He knew that in order for the sport to flourish, it badly needed a single recognizable name. In 1926, Hackinson proposed to use the name softball, although it wasn't until 1932 that the name gained a national acceptance. Despite the tremendous interest it had created in certain parts of the country, baseball's little sister sport was going nowhere fast. Softball found new direction, however, when Fisher and Pauley accepted an invitation from the organizers of the 1933 Chicago World's Fair to stage a softball tournament. The tournament attracted 55 teams from 16 states. The Chicago American reported, "It was the largest and most comprehensive tournament ever staged in the sport, which swept the country like wildfire." With free admission and unemployment at an all-time high, there were many people with plenty of time to attend the event. When the dust settled at the tournament's end, the event was viewed as a tremendous success on the playing field, convincing Fisher and Pauley more than ever that America needed a national softball organization. So they forged ahead, setting up an office in the Morrison Hotel in Chicago. Fisher served as president without a salary, and Pauley served as an executive secretary with a full-time salary of $2,600, despite the fact that the organization had no funds. Leo Fisher and M.J. Pauley together laid the foundation from which would emerge softball's national governing body, the Amateur Softball Association. To help get the 1934 tournament started, Pauley and Fisher obtained $7,000 from William Randolph Hearst to help defray the cost of hotel rooms and to provide entertainment for the 1,001 team members who played in the Chicago tournament. In addition to the financial support he provided, Hearst promoted the event through his newspaper and contributed a total of $50,000 through 1938. The Chicago Park District also helped out, setting up the diamonds at no expense. The men's champions of '34 were the Keenash A. Motormakers of Kenosha, Wisconsin, and received the William Randolph Hearst Trophy, which was 37 inches in height, with ball and figures of solid gold and ebony, valued at $1,000. After serving as president since its inception, Fisher retired in 1939. Although the U.S. finally overcame the Depression, its effects hung on into the early 1940s, when the U.S. entered the war and the government began drafting young men and spending more on its military. By 1945, 17 million people had entered the service, and unemployment almost disappeared. Even with the war, and with the U.S. emerging as a world superpower, the ASA surged forward following Fisher's retirement. Raymond Johnson took office as ASA president following the 1942 World's Championship. He came to serve the longest term as president in the history of the association, from September 1942 to January 1948. If not for Johnson, the ASA could easily have folded. Many felt the ASA would die during the war. However, not only did it survive, it came out of the war the largest amateur athletic organization in the world in the number of registered participants. In 1941, the ASA had more than 300,000 players competing and more than 100 million fans witnessing games. In these early years, however, the war was taking its toll on the sport of softball and the ASA. By 1943, the war had increased and caused the dismantling of thousands of men's civilian teams. The shortage of civilian teams was made up for by hundreds of defense plant clubs and 67,000 service teams. Women's teams during this time remained intact, and some traveled to military bases to play exhibition games against the troops. Softball players turned servicemen more than did their share to help promote and develop softball abroad. Softball participation in the armed forces dates back to 1934, to the Naval Air Station team. The servicemen helped to popularize softball overseas during World War II, and in time, nearly every company, wing, flight, office, and squad had a softball team. Following the German surrender on May 7, 1945, the engineer units, which normally built combat bridges and airfields, transformed the battlefields of Europe into ball fields. By midsummer, 200,000 troops were playing in competitive leagues and military duties were scheduled around games. Combat units temporarily put aside the emotional and physical scars of recent battles in their pursuit to be the best team in their region. It gave them pleasant memories and enabled them to forget the serious side of war momentarily. In the United States, the war years were also grim and frightening. The nation looked to the sport for diversion and relaxation since it was inexpensive and easy to play. Industrial and citywide recreational leagues for men, women, boys, and girls sprang up all over the nation. The nation needed softball, and softball needed the nation. Just prior to the 1949 annual meeting in Chicago in January, Pauley resigned as ASA Executive Secretary, ending 16 years of service to the ASA. With GIs returning home after the war and going to college under the GI Bill, the U.S. culture settled out of the 1930s and 40s radicalism and into a more consistent way of life. People began to have more leisure time and greater general prosperity, which resulted in more participants and fans for sports of all kinds. The ASA made a major change to its championship program in 1953 by adding men's slow pitch. Although slow pitch was played in the 1933 World's Fair softball tournament, fast pitch was the choice of play for a majority of players for many years. When the ASA added slow pitch to its championship division of play, it gradually increased in popularity, eventually comprising 80% of the softball played in the ASA. Unlike the fast pitch game, which could be dominated by a pitcher, slow pitch's appeal was that almost anyone could play, regardless of ability. In its heyday, all across America, people of all sizes and shapes and from all walks of life were playing slow pitch. Some played for exercise, some played to burn off tension, some played for fun, and some played because it was a difficult habit to break. One player said the reason he played was that he needed some excuse for leaving work early and coming in late. The increasing popularity of slow pitch, however, didn't help fast pitch. Men's fast pitch probably won't ever again reach the popularity it enjoyed in earlier years. However, women's fast pitch, especially in high schools and colleges, continues to gain popularity. In 1956, the ASA approved the first Women's All-Star Series. Together, Men's and Women's All-Star Series generated publicity and boosted national interest in softball, especially among the nation's youth. In 1957, the ASA launched its youth program. The ASA couldn't have picked a better time to start its youth program because, at that time, a staggering 70 million post-war baby boomers were reaching the youth program's target age. While the 1950s were conservative in nature, the 60s was a time of immense change in all areas of public and private life. For the ASA, it was also a time of change, progress, and television exposure. Softball made it to television twice in 1961. 1965 marked a milestone for the development of softball internationally, with the first International Softball Federation, ISF, Women's World Championship in Melbourne, Australia. By 1965, 50 countries were playing softball, and 5 of them competed in the inaugural event, including the host team, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, New Guinea, and the United States. The USA, represented by the renowned Rebestos Breakettes, were the heavy favorites in the event, but were surprised by the host Aussies, who won the championship 1-0. Although it wasn't the start the USA had hoped for, it was the beginning of an era of exposure and growth for softball internationally. In 1966, the first men's fast-pitch world championship was held in Mexico City, with 11 participating countries. The USA men, represented by the Aurora Sealmasters of Aurora, Illinois, prevailed. The Sealmasters repeated as world champions in 1968 in Oklahoma City. In April 1962, Don E. Porter joined the ASA staff as an administrative assistant. Porter had been associated with softball since 1953 and served as Southern California ASA commissioner since 1960. As Porter grew with the job, so did the ASA. Despite making changes and improvements to its programs, the ASA still operated out of the shoebox-sized headquarters, 700 square feet, in Newark, New Jersey. It was decided that the national office be moved to Oklahoma City. On January 7, 1966, the ASA held an open house for its national office and headquarters, located in the Skirvin Tower in downtown Oklahoma City. The Skirvin was suitable for the time being, but the ASA needed a larger building, and eventually the headquarters was moved again before deciding on a 5-acre site that included the Oklahoma City Zoo, the Firefighters Museum, and the Omniplex Science Museum. The plot, located northeast of downtown Oklahoma City, was ideal for the ASA at that time, but as it expanded, the organization would need more than 25 acres. The national headquarters was expanded, as was the staff, which grew from 4 or 5 people to as many as 35. With seasonal personnel, the staff can number as many as 70 people. The Amateur Softball Association played a vital role in launching the era of the aluminum bat. Starting in the early 1900s, there were several efforts to produce a ball bat made from aluminum. During the 60s, as science developed more durable alloys, aluminum found its way into many sporting goods products, such as skis, tennis rackets, and pool cues. In 1968, Amarola Products, a Pittsburgh manufacturer of aluminum pool cues, used their cue-making equipment to fashion a softball bat from an aluminum tube. The bat was suitable for softball play only because it lacked sufficient strength to withstand an impact with a baseball. From 1970 to 1975, the aluminum bat underwent many rapid developments as many companies entered the industry and competed aggressively for market share. Some companies began making bats with alloys strong enough to withstand the higher impact forces of hitting a baseball. During the 1970s and 80s, the slow-pitch softball game was exploding with participation, and the aluminum bat was just what the slow-pitch player wanted. Its increased durability and wide selection of available weights suited this new breed of softball player perfectly. After the social activism of the 1960s, the 1970s shifted to social activities for one's own pleasure. For the ASA, this decade proved to be one of outstanding growth and exposure. In December 1970, the ASA marked another milestone with the groundbreaking of the Hall of Fame and national headquarters. More than 100 people attended the event despite cold temperatures and chilly winds. President Richard Nixon even sent the ASA a congratulatory telegram to honor the event. In May 1973, the building was dedicated in front of an impressive invited delegation of ASA commissioners and Oklahoma City officials and dignitaries. 22 members of the National Hall of Fame attended the ribbon-cutting ceremonies conducted by Harold Shifty Gears and ASA President Eddie Moore. The passage of Title IX in 1972 was a milestone in the history of women's athletics, especially softball, yet it proved to be somewhat of a detriment to the ASA because its women's leagues, which had thrived in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, couldn't continue after colleges began offering scholarships which effectively tied these players up year-round. The end result of Title IX's impact on the ASA is that it shifted the organization's focus on women's summer softball as its major program, made up largely of college-age women, to its 18 and under program. While the ASA was gaining in stature, so was the sport, which was finally accepted into the 1979 Pan American program for San Juan, Puerto Rico. The USA women captured gold, beating Puerto Rico 2-0. The men earned silver after losing a heartbreaking 14-inning 1-0 decision to Canada in the championship game. Team sports for kids continued to gain in popularity in the 1980s, and the ASA was one of the organizations to benefit, taking advantage of the interest in youth sports by starting junior Olympic coaching schools in 1983. By 1989, the program had 11 schools, attended by over 1,000 participants. The ASA, which had gotten limited TV exposure in the past, got a break in 1981 when Major League Baseball, marred by a bitter players' strike that lasted from June 12th to the end of July, canceled 713 games, which is a third of the season. This allowed the ASA to get on to ESPN, which was looking for other sporting events to televise. The ASA completed its Hall of Fame stadium in 1987 and has hosted numerous international and domestic events. Some of the most prestigious events in softball have been held at the stadium, which now seats more than 5,000 people. It is booked with events for 26 weekends each year. Together, these events attract in excess of 500 teams and 120,000 fans to the stadium from mid-March to mid-October. Softball marked its 100th anniversary in 1987 with various special events, including a Centennial torch run from Chicago, the birthplace of softball, to Oklahoma City. Preceding the torch run, a monument was unveiled and dedicated at the former site of the Farragut Boat Club in Chicago, which is now Michael Reese Hospital. 16-inch Hall of Famer Eddie Zollner, Chicago's Mr. Z, kicked off the marathon's torch run, passing the torch to Hall of Fame fast pitcher Harvey Sterkel. From Chicago, the torch went through Illinois, Missouri, and Oklahoma. The run reached Oklahoma City in time for the opening ceremonies of the ISF Junior Girls World Fast Pitch Championship on July 10, 1987. The game drew in excess of 50,000 people, which is the largest attended softball event in Oklahoma City history. In the early 90s, the ASA, other sports organizations, and businesses changed how they communicated with their customers and clients thanks to the birth of the World Wide Web. By 1994, 3 million people were online in the U.S., and by 2007, 240 million people were online. Worldwide, 1.3 billion people were online. While the ASA moved forward into this new era of communications, it didn't forget its responsibility to the people playing softball. The ASA realized getting softball into the Olympics would have far-reaching implications on the organization and the sport. Throughout his career and into the 90s, Don E. Porter had worked tirelessly to get softball on the Olympic program. His efforts paid off on June 13, 1991, when it was announced that softball would make the Olympic program in 1996 in Atlanta, Georgia. In 1992, Porter said, "It should be obvious that this is a major milestone for softball, both in the USA and internationally. But what may not be as obvious is that this is also a major milestone for the Olympic program as a whole. Softball brings a vast audience of players and viewers to a program in critical need of more women participants. Softball has earned its day. We are happy that the International Olympic Committee agrees." In July 1996, the ASA named Ralph Raymond of Worcester, Massachusetts, coach of its first Olympic softball team. Raymond, who managed the renowned Rabestus Breakettes of Stratford, Connecticut, to 17 national titles, also led the United States to gold medals in the 1996 and 2000 Olympics. In the 1996 Olympics, softball made a memorable debut that left people speechless. The softball competition was played in Columbus, Georgia at Golden Park, which was an appropriate name for the venue because the USA team captured the first ever gold medal for softball in a determined battle against China, 3-1. At the event, more than 8,700 fans witnessed the United States' victory over China, and the gold medal victory did more to arouse the interest and spirit of millions of Americans than anything in the previous 24 years in the sport of softball. Following the 1996 competition, softball was elevated to the status of a major international sport. The interest and publicity generated by the Olympics, and especially the United States national team, had a profound effect on the ASA JO program, which experienced more than a 13% increase from 1995 to 1999. The rise in college scholarship opportunities for girls fast-pitch players also played a part in the increase. On April 30, 1998, Porter, who had served 35 years as executive director, retired from the ASA to devote his efforts to developing softball internationally, and became president of the ISF. The ASA saw registration increases during 33 of Porter's 35 years of service. At the ASA National Council meeting in Nashville, Tennessee, he was recognized for his loyal and dedicated efforts when the Hall of Fame Stadium was renamed the Don E. Porter ASA Hall of Fame Stadium. While women's fast pitch, especially at the college level, is growing by leaps and bounds, men's fast pitch in the United States is hanging on by a thread. The number of men's fast pitch teams has dwindled from thousands to hundreds, and the number of teams participating in the ASA National Fast Pitch Championship has fallen to fewer than 20. There used to be far more teams, leagues, and tournaments than we have today. The sport was traditionally a small-town game where virtually every town had a league. In some parts of the country, the local softball team or league attracted more fans than the counterpart minor league baseball team. In the 2000 Olympic Games, the U.S. women's national team staged one of the greatest comebacks in Olympic history, winning 5 consecutive games after 3 consecutive losses to take home the gold medal in Sydney, Australia. This performance brought softball, and especially the U.S. national team, unprecedented world media coverage, including the greatest amount of television coverage in the ASA's history. In 2004, the USA won its 3rd consecutive Olympic gold medal, going undefeated in 9 games with 8 consecutive shutouts, including 4 run rule wins. In a dominating performance, they allowed only 1 run in 9 games, led by the pitching and hitting of former UCLA standout Lisa Fernandez, who batted a record .545 and won 4 games inside the circle. The U.S. team broke no fewer than 18 team or individual records and set 11 different Olympic records en route to the gold medal. In 2004, Mike Candrea, head coach at University of Arizona, was named to succeed Raymond as head coach of the United States, guiding the team to a 3rd gold medal in Athens, Greece. He also led the team to the silver medal in the 2008 Olympics, losing to Japan 1-3, despite going undefeated in all preliminary games and even beating Japan twice in earlier rounds. After 2008, however, softball's Olympic status is in doubt. Softball, which has been an unqualified success in the Olympics, didn't even get on the agenda to be considered for the 2012 Olympics. The ISF and others are awaiting the outcome of a critical IOC meeting in Copenhagen, Sweden, in October of 2009, when the Olympic Committee will reconsider the inclusion of softball in the 2016 Games. Throughout its 75-year history, the ASA has had numerous people who helped and supported the organization in the game of softball. Without them, the ASA wouldn't be celebrating its Diamond Jubilee. A debt of gratitude and thanks goes to all of these people for the leadership they've provided for the past 75 years. As the ASA reflects on its 75 years, it can point with pride to the many people and volunteers who committed their time and efforts to moving the organization forward. These people have given untold hours and effort in the best interest of the ASA. The people who have been involved with the organization are proud of its legendary accomplishments. Since its founding, the ASA has given millions of adults and children the opportunity to play a lifetime sport and experience its thrill, whether in a national championship, an Olympic festival, the Pan American Games, the Olympic Games, or in a city recreation league a couple of times a week. Softball has been the sport of the masses, and the ASA has been the organization to move it forward, sometimes against overwhelming odds, to do what is in the best interest of the sport. Because of the tremendous job the ASA has done, softball is better for it, and the millions of people who have played ASA softball are better for it, thanks to Paulie and Fisher, who decided it would be a good idea to start a sports organization in the worst of times.